Hello, everyone. This is Marita, one who catches lightning, with the Path of Ish podcast, Walking with Our Shadow, where we share ancient indigenous teachings of remembrance, all so we can walk and learn how to walk a path of radical self-love. It is with great excitement that I welcome one of our popular guests back to the circle, Vesna. Vesna, welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So today we're going to have a different bit of a discussion. Last time we kind of learned about you and your past and your history and kind of your medicine and what you're offering the world. But today we're going to have a conversation about a new offering that you're collaborating with two other amazing ceremonialists as well. And really what it means to be trained in an indigenous way, what it means to be in a circle and to learn and to have access to that. And also, we're going to jump into also what this new ceremony is that is so amazing and is offered in Melbourne, Australia. How about that?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay, so let's just jump into immediately. You've done a lot of trainings over the years. You're very scholarly, and you've done a lot of different things in the spiritual world and in the science and spirituality. What is different about being trained in an indigenous circle to be a ceremonialist, right? I mean, that usually takes, your whole life to be able to do it. So kind of what are you stepping into that you're excited about that was different than a lot of the trainings? Let's talk about that first.
For me, being in an Indigenous circle, it really lands differently. In the previous trainings that I've done, what I noticed and what I would sort of get caught up in myself would be having to do something in a specific way, having a step-by-step program of this is how you do it. An Indigenous circle, it's not like that at all, which is a relief. I felt like it was a relief in one way, but also not in another way. After coming out of trainings where they say, this is the protocol, this is what you do step by step. And so when you haven't been sitting in Indigenous circle, that's what you're sort of looking for. But at the same time, learning how to sit in an Indigenous circle where there isn't a right or a wrong way, it's such a relief because it actually allows me to be me. And knowing that me just being in the circle, being who I am, is not wrong. I'm not trying to have to change myself. Yeah, in being in that circle. So that's one of my main takeaways, is that it's actually a relief to have an opportunity to sit in a training where I can be me and I don't have to change myself to try and fit into a specific way or what people think I should look like because I am a scientist or a meditation facilitator. So yeah.
So there are, you use the word protocols. There are protocols in indigenous circles, but you're talking about it in kind of a very different way, more kind of like a script and kind of like a character that you have to play. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm glad you brought that up because, it was because essentially my training, as a meditation teacher, like my assignments were writing scripts. That's what we
Mm,
did. that's what
Mm.
our training was. And sitting with you in the trainings I've done with you, it's not about writing a script. It's actually like throwing that script out the window. And I remember when we first collaborated with when you came down to Melbourne, and we held the Yoga Nidra and lucid dreaming cacao ceremony together.
Mhm.
And, you know, I being having trained in Yoga Nidra, and most of it is via a script. And so, I came to you and I'd like written everything out. And I'm like, oh, Marina, this is, what I think like, the
I was like,
direction we go in. Um, and, you know, I was actually creating more anxiety for myself because I was forcing myself to fit into that script and not allowing a space for change to occur. And it was funny because on the day of the ceremony at the place where we were staying, I was just looking through the books and I found this beautiful story about the Prometheus moth. And I was reading it and I was like, oh my God, this is like everything that we have been talking about in terms of like what I guess um, the lucid dreaming and the yoga nidra cacao ceremony was going to be about. And you're like, well, why don't you just read this story? I'm like, can I do that? Is that against the rules? Because, like, is it yoga nidra then? Like, and it really enabled me to change my perspective because I was telling a story. It's like telling a bedtime story to get you into a state of yoga nidra. And yeah, so I just remember that memory and that experience. And so yeah, when I did say protocol, I meant script. But yeah.
so instead of scripts, right? Let's continue playing with this off script kind of approach. These circles ask you to actually do more work. Am I correct?
Yeah.
All of a sudden, people are like, "Oh, great! I can just go and do a Native American ceremony and have no training. I can do whatever I want. I can just be me." No, so requires a very different kind of work. And so, since you're not going off a quote unquote script, right? And there are, again, we're not speaking of all traditional ceremonies. There are some very traditional ceremonies where you have to say certain things, and we created one, right, with very
Yeah.
traditional protocols. The Eek ceremony from grief to freedom has a lot of very, very traditional where we say things word for word. But this is more, I think, what we're talking about is a way of being and showing up. So this
Yeah.
is more of an off script way of how the Western world is training people to do medicine ceremonies, to do ceremonies, whether they're calling them indigenous or not, or they've been taken from indigenous people and calling them ceremony, is there where we go into circles with deep relationships, right? And deep relationships mean you have to be in deep relationship with yourself as well as the protocol or the words or the way of being. So it's beyond words, right? You're not just going to read from a script, but you live it. You live
Yeah.
that deep relationship. So let's talk a little bit about the deep relationship that you have been working all your life, right? That you brought to this Eek ceremony from grief to freedom as you did it last weekend with breath, with Eek.
Oh, so my relationships, hmm, breath, I think we all have a relationship with, right? Um, when I first started practicing yoga and um, pranayama breathing techniques, that was a thing that I really connected to was breath. And that was the first thing that had led me to your circles that had really stood out to me was the eke breath practice. And one of the things, as I have been journeying, I guess, throughout this life, that has helped me bring me back into connection with myself. Our breath is always with us. And it's something that I think we overlook in our society as being important.
What's coming to me is, there's so many breath practices out there, right? And we're talking about relationship. And then this circle, when we're talking about relationship, it's not just with yourself. Like our breath isn't just our breath.
No.
When we breathe in, it is not just because we exist. Our breath is because we are in relationship to the trees, right? Who are giving us oxygen. And then we
Mhm.
breathe back. So in these circles, when we talk about even breath, and kind of as we keep defining the difference, that there's so many words that are thrown around in spirituality these days, taking time to redefine the difference of them, the feel of them, is that in these circles, your breath is not your own, right?
No.
It's not you as an individual. Am I correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like we all have it is what connects us all. And by all I don't mean just humans, all as in the planet, the trees, the sun, the moon, the sky, the wind, waters, everything. Yeah, so I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah. And I think another thing is, as we are going to start jumping into the ceremony and talking a little bit about it and the journey it provides is, in indigenous circles, the community and the I are the same. I do not exist without my community. My community does not exist without I, without
Yeah,
myself, which is
yeah,
very different from Western colonized spaces or New Age spiritual spaces or people who don't really live in circleness, right? And they just kind of try to take Native American teachings or trainings, is that it is not about you.
yeah,
It's not about you
yeah,
because the ego is not that frail. It doesn't need to be lifted up by other people to tell it that it has worth. Our worth
yeah,
comes because we're creatures of the planet. And so
yeah,
then when we live our life, we live in deep relationship with all of the beings around us, all animals, creatures, minerals, the elements, the elementals, all of these things. And we live it in a way knowing that we affect them and they affect us. Therefore, when we come to the circle to do ceremony, we do it because we need our community
yeah,
to heal.
yeah,
Versus a lot of breath practices out there and a lot of the things being taught is about you go in with your story, someone will teach you something, and you go through your experience, and that's it.
yeah,
That's it. really. You use the energy, of course, of, crowds to motivate people. But this is a very different way of walking. And if you've never been in indigenous circles or in the path of Asia, I highly recommend you continue listening to these podcasts, but also find a way to get involved, find a way to see how things are so culturally different. So let's jump into this. I mean, even the ceremony is different. We're not talking about, manifesting or love or save yourself or be the next millionaire. It's the title is From
Mhm.
Grief to Freedom. And it's not freedom from grief, it's the freedom to walk with grief. So let's talk a little bit about grief and what you kind of have experienced being trained up to do this, and how your passage with grief has been.
My passage with grief. Oh, it's been a very long one. In fact, it goes back so far that it goes back to my ancestors. And a lot of the work that I've been doing, particularly this year, I mean, last year as well, was walking through that ancestral grief that I've been carrying.
Now, what does that look like? Like, you're very in touch, you're in these circles that hold you, but, how did that feel? How did ancestral grief show up in your life? So we can give people kind of examples, because then they're going to be like, what are you talking about? No, none of my ancestors come talk to me and give me grief. So,
um, for me, it showed up a lot in my anger. And I've been carrying so much grief from, you know, events that have happened in my life, um, that sifting out the anger was the thing for me that was really, and I'm starting to get emotional now just thinking about it. You know, I've been through a birth trauma experience, and as I was working through the grief that I was experiencing from that, and once I had felt like I had sat with a lot of that grief, I noticed I was still angry, and it would just keep showing up. And I was kind of like, what is this? What is this anger? Why am I so angry? And I asked that anger, why am I so angry? And it showed me all of the other grief that I was carrying too, that I hadn't even realized. The grief of my family who had experienced genocide, concentration camps, the grief of my family having to find a new home, looking for that dream where they could live a life where they weren't running away all of the time, where they weren't afraid. And that was another thing that um, would show up a lot for me, which was fear. That's another way that grief was speaking to me, through fear. My family migrated from Yugoslavia to England on my mother's side and then to Australia, and they were looking for that dream. But yet they didn't have the opportunity to sit with all the grief that they had been carrying because they just had to keep going. And so they were sold a better life. They were told that they could come to Australia and they could live without being in fear. And to some extent, that was true, but yet they were still living, and I would say a lot of my family are still living in fear.
Mm-hmm.
And so I felt that this fear and this anger, it was almost like a light switch, like a light bulb moment where this fear and this anger that I was carrying, I realized was all connected to the grief of my family, the grief of my ancestors, the grief from all the other experiences that I've lived in my life. And that has gone unacknowledged. And so my process was to start acknowledging that grief. And earlier this year, I sat for 40 days in mourning for my ancestors. And I think a lot of people might think mourning is that really dark place. No one really wants to be in that. Something that I realized is that having the space to mourn was actually really beautiful. There was a sweetness to being able to grieve for my ancestors, to mourn for them, and to honor them so that I may continue to live my life with love, and so that my children don't need to carry that grief. And to show them what grief looks like too, that it is okay to grieve.
And some of that grief made beautiful dishes as well, food dishes. Am I correct?
Absolutely.
Grieving is hungry work, just like
Uh,
love.
yes. Yeah. And I find, now as I prepare for ceremony, I'm cooking a lot because it's feeding ourselves and comforting ourselves and calling on those relationships that are here to support us. And the way I do that is through food, through my relationship with food and all the beautiful plants that provide medicine for me to be able to do this work, to be able to live here on this planet.
As we're speaking about this, I feel like, since we are off script, none of these are scripted, that you pray and that you mourn and that you love, right? Again, it shouldn't be a scripted thing. It's, those recipes that haven't been written down, but that you have to feel with your hands and feel with your heart and have a knowing. Would that be kind of correct for you, Vesna?
Yeah, absolutely. They're just, when you were here, and I was just, I'd, an ingredient would speak to me, and I'm like, I have to make that. And in fact, it was probably one of my grandmothers that was, I'd always be like, oh, my bubba's making me make something again. So I'd be making cornbread or pies with apples and sour cherries and things like that that just speak to me, and the joy and the love that I would put into create and the honor that I would put into creating and transforming whatever I was experiencing into that dish. There's a story that I shared in ceremony over the weekend, and it's a story that I'm so grateful for. I have this beautiful lemon tree that is in my backyard. It's still there, actually, but it's dying. And a few months ago, as we were going through this EEC breathwork training, I was sitting with my lemon tree outside. It had these beautiful lemons on it. And I was just awestruck at how this lemon tree that I knew was dying was able to produce these beautiful lemons. And all I wanted to do was fix the lemon tree so that it wouldn't die. And I asked it, how is it that you are still able to produce these lemons, but you're dying? And what can I do to fix it? Do I cut you down? Do I dig you out? What do I need to do? And it was just like, well, I'm going to die either way. So it doesn't really matter. You could cut me down, you could dig me out, you could just leave me here. It was almost like it was offering me the lemons so that I could transform them into something else. So I asked for the lemons and I made a lemon cake in honor of this dying lemon tree that I loved so much. And I didn't follow a recipe, there was no script. It was just connection and relationship with the lemon tree and with my ancestors, and a deep honoring of the grief that I was experiencing because I loved this lemon tree so much and I didn't want it to die. But that is part of nature. And so I baked this cake, and it was the most delicious cake that I have ever made. And I had some leftover lemons, and I was just eating those lemons, and they tasted like the sweetest lemons I have ever tasted in my life.
Mm.
And so I gave back the cake to the tree, and I filled myself up. I shared it with my family, and I filled them up too. And so, what I feel like that has taught me is this transformation, that it is okay to grieve and to let go and know that things are always going to be changing. And I have the ability to make a choice as well, that I can choose what I can do with this grief. And I can pour more love into it to create something even more beautiful than I can imagine.
You know, they always say cook with love and you can taste it. But I also feel like maybe why that cake was the best cake you've ever had is because you also cooked with grief. Grief and love provide amazing seasonings. One without the other really doesn't allow for a fullness of deep relation. What do you think about that, Vesna?
Yeah, absolutely. And what comes to mind is like when you're baking, and you know how they say just add that little pinch of salt
Mm-hmm.
because it brings out that sweetness.
Mm-hmm.
Without that saltiness, that sweetness won't be as felt or as experienced.
Yes, I had the same imagery. So beautiful. So beautiful. Oh, so as we breathe this breath that allows us to be in deep relation with lemon trees and ancestors and ways of being. For all those who have practiced or followed along this podcast and listened to the 3 breath episode that we just put up again or breathed with us, what is this is kind of a leap of or jump of faith, right? Between that three breaths and this ceremony. Would you say it's a big leap or an easy?
It's a leap.
Yeah, it's a good leap of faith.
You need a bit of a run.
We're creating something in between, but we kind of work backwards. So, but what happens when you take a leap into the unknown? Here you're leaping into a ceremony you've never gone before. It's been woven together for, and I don't know, 4,000, 5,000 years to what it is now. You're stepping into culturally a different culture. But what is that you step into the unknown and step into this ceremony, Vesna?
When you step into the unknown, you're stepping in to possibility. Possibility that you can't even imagine. And how beautiful is that?
Yeah, even humans, we love habits. We love things. We say we want the unknown, but we want it to be manicured for us or bespoke,
Mm,
right? Created exactly in a way that is not going to, make us feel a way we don't want to. Yet it doesn't allow for change.
yeah,
You're just creating or living in the same reality that you keep habitually controlling. And there has to be, a little pressure, a little bit something different, right? The unknown, that pinch of salt that no one thinks of, or cumin or cinnamon, or that slow cooker or that hot pot, to get things moving. And so stepping into the unknown immediately, as you said, is a possibility that you don't know the outcome.
yeah.
It's outside of your habit. So, other than stepping outside of a habit, why should people come to this ceremony? Why now? Why Melbourne?
Mm.
Which is the only place in the world right now where you can do this ceremony.
We, I feel, have been denied
Hmm.
this opportunity,
Hmm.
this opportunity to step into our grief. And in Melbourne, I feel like it is a melting pot. After the last 3 years in particular, where we've had COVID and restrictions, and people aren't able to recognize their grief. But yet, they are needing to grieve because they are grieving and it is seeping out. And so I feel like this ceremony, which I've never experienced a ceremony like this before, is an opportunity for us to tend to our grief, to tend to what's been bubbling under the pressure cooker of our society. And I think this ceremony really allows for us to do that, and is so important for us as a society to tend to our grief so that we can heal ourselves, but also the planet. Because as we are not acknowledging our grief and as we are not tending to it, we are consuming and we are taking, and we will never be full if we continue in this way. And so this is why I think that people should come to this ceremony to remember how to grieve and to find the power in our grief that walks alongside love.
You know, the beautiful thing about circles like this is that you can have grief and love in the same circle, hand in
Mm,
hand, as friends. You don't have to chop them off, cut them off, compartmentalize them. And I think it really allows you, everyone's wanting to like hold energy, right?
mm,
But they only want to hold a certain type of vibration or energy.
yeah,
And yet you want more and more. And as I tell students, it's like you have to look at yourself as a container, right? If you continue just holding one vibration, then your container can only fit that vibration. And if you add anything else, of course, it's like, oh. So you have to start stretching yourself, right? Holding things hand in hand that popular culture has told you is bad or makes you feel bad, right? It's not about the emotion, it's about letting go of that and really becoming a vessel that can hold what you might deem in your mind good and bad, and everything in between, the grief and the love, the joy and the hope and the despair. The more that you can work your body with your body, your mind, and your essence, which is what the three breaths do, is you're training yourself to have greater capacity. And if you have greater capacity for love and grief, then you have greater capacity for empathy. I was walking through Target today, and we've had a crazy week and morning, and there's a lot of stuff going on. And I was like, wow, one of those moments, and I think about it a lot, is like, you never know what someone's experiencing
yeah,
as they're walking with a trolley next to you on their day to day. You have no idea. People could be
yeah,
going through a huge loss. People could be in huge health issues. Like, you have no idea what that other being is going through. And Western social civilized society tells you it doesn't matter. It's about you. You get ahead. You do you, at the expense of everyone and everything else, including the planet.
yeah,
Yet this ceremony and these indigenous circles say, hey, 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 let's all sit together and bring up the dark and the light and all the shades in between, because the more that I can hold my grief and my love, then I can listen to you, Vesna, and it doesn't feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It feels like, wow, I wanted a piece of that lemon cake. That sounds like amazing. To be able to transmute, right? We always think that transmutation is just this magical thing in the air, but literally transmutation, and changing shape of an energy or becoming solid, you have that amazing alchemy. Here's another, I'm having fun with a lot of these words today, of actually creating something. And it can be a cake or it can be a ceremony. Ooh.
Yeah.
So you've done the first one with your co-facilitators
Hmm.
without one who catches lightning in the room physically. What are you looking forward to the next one, and who do you want to call into the next one? Because we know a lot of people wanted to attend and couldn't, and we know that everyone should go.
Yes. Everyone's welcome to come. All are welcome to the circle. I'm calling in anybody that is feeling the stories that we've spoken about today, and what we've been speaking about, grief and love, and walking hand in hand, and walking with cohesiveness, and getting to know who you are, and learning more about you, but also about everyone else too, about the planet, about the beautiful beings, and what a gift it is to be here, to be able to experience all of this.
Beautiful. With deep gratitude to you, Vesna, as you continue to walk your path. Thank you for being an example of what it is to really sit with yourself, to take the time to digest things so that you can have, as you could say, a bigger appetite and a bigger
Mm.
way to be able to create more and have more and feed more, because we're all hungry. We know that we're
Yeah.
hungry beings. Well, thank you so much for taking the time, and can't wait to catch up with you again. And do you have any other offerings in between here now that you have like to invite people to?
Oh, first of all, just thank you so much for having me, and for this opportunity to share the Ik breathwork practice. Um, some events that I have coming up, I have a series called Honoring Ancestors. So I've got that coming up in September. My next one, I have Cocoon of Care, which is about honoring the journey of motherhood. So all cacao ceremonies. So I have a few things going on. So check out my website, vesnavavladellis.com, and all the info's there. And of course, Ik Breathwork in October again.
Very well. So excited to partake in all of these. And lots of these are have the medicine of cacao as what you walk with. Am I correct?
Yes, absolutely. Nearly everything.
So also, if you want to experience the only slave-free, no child labor ceremonial cacao that's out there in the world right now, to the best of our knowledge. And I talk to a lot of people around the world about their practices. Want a taste of freedom? Check out Cuatro Manos y Cinco Volcanes Cacao. We are running low, but don't fret. We are making more, hopefully in the next couple of days. So stock up when it's cold so it doesn't melt. But the amazing thing is if it melts, you can just put it in the fridge and it's still good to go. So, okay. As you know, Vesna, I'm like, just take it.
It's so
Beautiful.
fun.
Beautiful. And we didn't get to talk about atoli, but we'll talk about that next time. This
Yeah.
beautiful corn and cacao drink that you get when you go to the ceremony. So we always feed you in ceremonies. If you're
Ah,
ever at a path of Ish or Cuatro Manos Volcanes or Vesna's ceremonies, we always feed you. You know, it's always an important thing to do because ceremony is hungry work.
it is. It is.
Beautiful. Well, if you don't catch Vesna and these next few opportunities in September, check them out in October. And as always, 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 take a moment to follow them on their Instagram. They have an amazing, beautiful, poetic Instagram. And if you ever get to convince them to cook for you, do it. So, with gratitude and grace, Vesna, thank you so much. And many blessings to you and your family and your lemon tree.
Thank you so much.
Once again, it is with deepest gratitude that I bow to you for joining me on this podcast, this episode, this circle, this plática, this meditation, this remembering. I hope that you have stayed curious. I hope to see you in the circle again next week. So make sure that you like or follow. Until then, may you be blessed with abundance of peace and radical self-love.